Physics is roughly broken down into 5 core areas: classical mechanics, thermodynamics, electromagnetism, relativity, and quantum mechanics. You need to have a solid understanding of all of these things before you can really call yourself a physicist. That being said, quantum mechanics is pretty special. It works off some seemingly unobvious principles, and many of the phenomena it predicts have an underlying probabilistic nature. It's kind of the recipe for a conceptual disaster, which leads to it often being misunderstood by those without much experience in the field. It's actually quite difficult to find one coherent guide for quantum mechanics, something to lead you continuously from the first discovery of quantum phenomena all the way up to quantum fields and particle physics. I'm aiming to do just that, or something kind of like that. So I'm going to explain quantum mechanics. All theories in physics have some kind of scale that they're applicable at. Quantum mechanics is a theory of the small, but its consequences can be seen on a larger scale. Ultimately, it's quantum mechanics that's behind things like contact forces, chemistry, and statistical physics. Whilst quantum mechanics is an incredibly fundamental theory of physics, centuries of classical physics had to happen first before the modern era of quantum mechanics was forced into existence in the early 1900s. Let's start there. Before quantum mechanics came about, theoretical physicists pretty much thought they were done from their perspective. I mean, Einstein was cracking the nut on how to describe gravity, and Maxwell had produced one of the most beautiful theories of all time, electromagnetism, which worked pretty damn well apart from the infinite self-energy of the electron. Usually, a new theory is developed when an old one simply fails to explain what's observed. Feynman really captured this when he said, "It doesn't matter how beautiful your theory is, it doesn't matter how smart you are. If it doesn't agree with experiment, it's wrong." So which screw-up caused the need for quantum mechanics? Physicists at the time were investigating black bodies. A black body is just what we call a perfect emitter and absorber of electromagnetic radiation. Such objects don't really exist in reality, but it's a good approximation for many scenarios. For example, the sun is fairly well approximated as a black body. No, seriously, bear with me. All bodies are constantly emitting electromagnetic radiation, but of what frequency? Is it infrared, microwave, gamma rays, X-rays? Well, the answer is every frequency, but in different amounts. For example, an object may emit far more infrared and microwave radiation than it does radio waves or X-rays. Or a neutron star in deep space will emit far more radio waves than it does infrared or microwave radiation. The spectrum of a body gives us the exact distribution of this radiation. The spectrum of a black body is of course dependent on its temperature. As you change the temperature, the amount of internal energy of the overall system will change, and in turn you affect the amount of energy it's able to radiate. Okay, this all sounds fine. Where are the problems? How do we get from here to uncertainty principles, entanglement, spin, and quantum fields? Well, when experimental physicists went away and measured the spectrum of black bodies, they found a distribution that had a very distinct shape for a given temperature, but this was completely different to the spectrum predicted by theorists. Theory predicted the classical Rayleigh-Jeans law, where the spectrum was supposed to be proportional to the frequency squared. The fact that this diverged to infinity was already worrying enough. Infinities are generally not good in physics. Problem arises around the ultraviolet region, where the classical prediction starts to seriously diverge from the experimental data. This was the ultraviolet catastrophe. So why did physicists end up with this complete disparity? The ultraviolet catastrophe is partly a consequence of the theorem of equipartition of energy, a key idea in thermodynamics. The equipartition of energy states that for a system in equilibrium at a temperature T, each degree of freedom contributes on average 1/2 kT of energy, where K is Boltzmann's constant. Let's just break down what this means. Firstly, a degree of freedom is just one of the ways that a system can store energy. For example, a particle moving in a straight line has 1 degree of freedom, as it can only store energy by translational motion in the x direction. A particle moving in 3 dimensions has 3 degrees of freedom. It can store energy in translational motion in the x, y, and z directions. So this particle would have an average kinetic energy of 3/2 kT. Likewise, an electromagnetic wave in a cavity with 2 polarization modes would have an average energy of kT. Each polarization mode contributes 1/2 kT of energy. It's important to note that energy can be stored in a potential too. They also add degrees of freedom to the system. Okay, back to the ultraviolet catastrophe. To investigate the spectrum of black bodies, physicists were measuring the radiance of black bodies, defined as the radiated power per unit frequency per unit area. Keeping this definition in mind will help us actually calculate it in theory. Let's consider an area A, radiating electromagnetic waves perpendicular to the surface, and ask the question, how much power is being radiated per unit frequency? Well, the power is going to be equal to the energy radiated per unit frequency divided by the time taken to radiate. We know we'll have to include a factor of 1/2, as half of the energy will be radiated inwards and not out. We could imagine that the radiation is sweeping out a volume as it travels, with area A and length d, which is equal to the speed of light multiplied by time. And we can relate this to the energy by writing it as the energy density per unit frequency multiplied by the volume. We're using the derivative of the energy density with respect to frequency because we're interested in the power radiated at specific frequencies, not the power radiated over some finite frequency range. Now, we could just move on and consider how to deal with the energy density, but first note that this is for energy being radiated perpendicular to the surface. But in general, the energy will be radiated at some angle theta, so the effective area is A cos theta, and the effective speed of the wave is C cos theta. So we instead get an expression that involves a cos squared term. To account for the total energy radiated over all angles, we can average this function over theta, which gives an extra factor of 1/2. Now, for the energy density term, we could write this as the energy of each mode multiplied by the number of modes per unit volume per unit frequency, the density of states. From the equipartition of energy, we know that an electromagnetic wave with two polarizations is going to have an average energy of kT, so we can put that into our expression. Now we just need to figure out this density of states term, the number of modes per unit volume per unit frequency. To work out the density of states, let's consider our electromagnetic wave in the cavity of a black body. Now, if you've studied any wave phenomena before, you'll know that a wave stuck in a cavity, or analogously a wave fixed on a string, sets up a standing wave pattern. The incoming wave reflects off one side, and the reflective wave goes on to constructively and destructively interfere with the incoming wave. The wave is going to be described by some sinusoidal function, which should be equal to 0 at both ends of the cavity. This is what we call a boundary condition. The name is quite self-explanatory. The boundary condition restricts the wave vector k to integer multiples of pi over L. The wave vector is just quantity equal to 2 pi over the wavelength. This is a one-dimensional representation, but it can easily be extended to 3 dimensions, adding 2 more boundary conditions. We could consider each cavity mode as being represented by these 3 wave vector numbers, kx, ky, and kz, even more abstractly as a vector in k-space, where rather than using xyz coordinates, we're using the wave vectors as our basis. Let's just remind ourselves of what we're trying to do here. We want to find the density of states in the cavity, which we can identify as a function of frequency from its definition as the number of states per unit volume per unit frequency. So to find that, we need to know how many states there are. This is where the k-space representation really comes in handy. Each state is a vector in k-space, but only for positive k values. For a given radius, we could consider the area of this quarter hemisphere, and then consider an infinitesimal shell of thickness dk around this and ask how many states are in the shell. The number of states n is the volume of the shell divided by the volume per state, with a factor of 1/8 as we're only considering positive k, and a factor of 2 to account for the fact that there are 2 polarizations. Both volumes can be written down quite easily. The volume of the shell is 4 pi k squared times the infinitesimal thickness dk. To get the volume per state, we consider a small cubic volume occupied by each state, with length k over n. The volume per state is then pi cubed over v, where v is the total volume of the cavity. So we can go back and write the number of states per unit volume as a function of k. Writing this as a function of frequency is just a matter of writing k as 2 pi nu over c and changing the differential. Then we can easily identify the density of states as 8 pi nu squared over c cubed. When we recombine all of these terms and divide by the area, we get the radians and our frequency squared divergence. Whilst there's nothing wrong with this theory from a classical perspective, it simply didn't match experiment, and when this is the case in physics, a new theory is needed, one that's consistent with previous experiments but can explain new results. This is what led to quantum mechanics. Hey, thanks for checking out this first video in a new series I'm doing covering quantum mechanics. Sorry, it's been a while since the last video. The first part of this series is to give some motivation for the development of quantum mechanics before moving on to a more rigorous first principles approach in part 2. If you want to stay updated on this and pretty much everything else I do, then you can follow me on Twitter through the link in the description.